the key for leaders, is that you never get to the point where you don't let people who know you well, whether it's your team, spouse, friends, you don't get to the point where they don't have the right at any time to walk in and say, hey, listen, you know what? Like, I need to confront you on the fact that you're killing me right now. And you're not a leader I like being around. And you're not a leader that we want to be led by. Because most of us, we have blind spots.
This is the L3 Leadership Podcast, episode number 213. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the L3 Leadership Podcast. My name is Doug Smith, and I am your host. I hope you're doing well. In today's episode, you'll hear my interview with Brad Lomenick. I've been following Brad for well over a decade with his work with Catalyst Conference and now everything else that he's doing in the leadership space. So for me personally, it was a great honor to get to spend an hour with him, interviewing him, and we cover all kind of things in this interview. It is absolutely phenomenal. You're going to love it. But if you don't know Brad, here's what you need to know about him. For over a decade, he served and led as president of Catalyst Conference, one of America's largest movements of Christian leaders. He's a strategic advisor, leadership consultant, specializing in influence, innovation, generational issues, and business strategy. He's a sought-after speaker at conferences, churches, colleges, as well as the author of The Catalyst Leader and H3 Leadership. In the interview, you'll hear Brad talk about his leadership journey, what it was like to lead Catalyst, and how he had to grow as a leader as the conference grew. He talks about creating and leading world-class events, which Catalyst is certainly one of those. He's also talked about what he's learned from being around some of the world's greatest leaders. We talk about his book, H3 Leadership, and much, much more. You guys are just going to love this interview. But before we dive into that, just a few announcements. So first, I'm really excited to let you know that we scheduled our first L3 one-day leadership conference. It's going to be on Friday, March 15th, 2019, right here in Cranberry Township, Pennsylvania, just 20 minutes outside of the city of Pittsburgh. And this has been a dream in my heart for so long, and so I'm so excited that it's finally coming up. Our keynote speakers, we have a great lineup for this event. We have Matt Keller, the pastor of Next Level Church from Fort Myers, Florida, incredible leader and a mentor in my life. Laura Ellsworth, who's the partner in charge of Global Community Services Initiatives at Jones Day, Dr. Chris Howard, the president of Robert Morris University, and Salim Gubril, who's the executive director of the Pittsburgh Promise. They are our keynote speakers. We're also going to have breakout sessions and a panel discussion. It's going to be an incredible conference, and so I really want to encourage you to bring your team, register for the event. It'll be a day that you will not forget. You can get more information and register at l3oneday.com. Again, that's l3oneday.com. I also want to thank my friend and sponsor, Alex Toulandon. Alex is a full-time realtor with Keller Williams Realty, and if you are looking to buy or sell a house in the Pittsburgh market, Alex is your guy. He's a member and a supporter of L3 Leadership, and he would love to have an opportunity to connect with you. So if you want to learn more about Alex, go to pittsburghpropertyshowcase.com. And with that being said, we'll dive right into the interview. Enjoy, and I will be back at the end with a few announcements. Brad, thank you so much for being willing to do this interview. And why don't we just start off with you telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thanks, Doug. So, I would say a classic leadership junkie in the sense that growing up and a lot of my life has been about trying to be a leader as well as trying to study leadership and be a student of leadership. And, everything for me during different seasons, whether it was school or high school or college or post-college, has really all been built around that premise of I felt a call and a sense of connection to stepping out in front. And so if you had to define my life, I would say, leadership is definitely one of those words that would define it. The other thing would be, my own personal faith. So where those things cross and mix together is where really most of my energy has been for the past, especially career life, but also just growing up. I worked for John Maxwell for a bunch of years, so if somebody said, hey, who really shaped you as a leader, I would probably put John at the top of that list, or at least on the list, with some other people. And working with John was just an amazing opportunity, but it also, when you're around somebody who's such a content machine, you start to see under the radar and under the hood of how he actually comes up with so much stuff that's helpful for people. And the thing I learned from John, especially in regards to, serving other people, is that part of your job as a leader is to actually, one, it's to empower people, but two, it's actually to give people what is helpful to them. And so, a lot of my own messaging and stuff I've written or when I speak or what I'm trying to do with people is really be practical. And, sometimes for people who are thought leaders or experts or the ones that start writing things, they get so in the clouds, and somebody reads it and goes, well, that's great, but how's it going to help me? And so I always want to stay connected to this practical piece. That's, it's helpful today. It's not just something that becomes a theory, but it's actually something I can put into practice in my daily life. So those are a few, I would say big buckets that I've tried to build and work on and create over the years.
Yeah, I'm curious. So when you worked for John, you worked for Catalyst, and really throughout your whole journey, have there been maybe 3 or 4 moments in your life where you really had to go to the next level and something happened or you learned something that really helped you go further? And if so, what are some of those things that you learned throughout that journey?
Well, I would say, Doug, that my story, I think this is true of a lot of leaders and probably for you too, is that every season I've jumped into, that was a new season where there was a lot of opportunity. There was also a great sense of challenge because I wasn't ready. And I think a lot of people, especially when you're younger, you think, well, I have to know all the answers before I actually can take on that role. And that might be true, but for me, it's never been true. I've always been in a place where I was sort of, out over my skis, and I didn't really feel like, if I was honest, that I had any sense of being in the role I was in. I mean, Callis is a great example. Like I was helping John Maxwell with doing events and conferences and simulcast. But, when I stepped into leading Catalyst, I felt zero sense that I was the right person to do that and or prepared. Now, I knew I would work hard, but, I think that's a good place to be as a leader, is when you look around and go, oh my gosh, I hope nobody realizes that I don't know what I'm doing. Because you're way more hungry, you're way more willing to listen. You walk in to every connection point or conversation or meeting with the sense of I better be really intentional about getting better every day, compared to the other side, which is I know it all. I've done this before. This is old hat. It's about time I got this opportunity. That can be really dangerous. So I would say, to your question though, the points for me that have been really defining have been a couple of seasons. One was actually jumping into working with John Maxwell, and that was just this opportunity that I never thought would be in front of me. The other one was when I stepped out of leading Catalyst. That was a jump into a new season of the unknown, of sort of saying, one, I want to hand it off, but two, I want to make sure that I can do some things that only I can do. But it was also a scary season of sort of becoming your own brand and building your own company and starting to do your own thing. And, you eat what you kill. And both of those were really foundational for me in terms of the one was that I was leading something I didn't feel like I was prepared for. And the second one was that I felt like I was prepared, but it was still that risk of saying, I'm going to jump out here and go on my own and actually do something that I haven't done in the past. So those were two, I would say, really memorable and also mile marker sort of moments for me in my journey.
Yeah, just to follow up and dig a little deeper on that, I'm curious, when it came to new opportunities that were presented to you that you didn't feel ready for, how many times were those opportunities something that someone saw in you and believed in you and gave you a shot versus you actually pursuing it? And can you just tie that in for young leaders? What advice would you have for them when it comes to becoming the right person for a role and attracting it versus actually pursuing? Is there a balance?
That's good. Well, my advice always to young leaders is start preparing now what you want to be doing later, and that your now is actually creating opportunities for your next. But you can't just focus on the next. If you're only focused on the next, then the now will become, the stuff that you're not concerned about. But the now is actually the stuff that gives you opportunities. And so, and most of the time, this is true for all of us who are ambitious, or we feel like there's something on us, or there's a calling or a purpose that is greater than the role we're currently in, is that we start spending so much energy trying to get to that next mountaintop, but we forget about, again, what's right in front of us. And the right in front of us is actually the best way to get to the next mountaintop. So if you're 24 and you're just starting out and you look at that VP position in the organization and you think, one, I should be doing that. I'm skilled enough and prepared enough. I don't have the experience, but I feel like I could step in. There's nothing wrong with that. But what you want to do is you want to take your current, coordinator role and you want to crush it. Every day you come in, you want to look at that and say, the best way for me to actually get to the destination I want to get to is to take today and be the best expression of what I've been assigned to and the stewardship I have of my current role. And that's where the assignment piece, that every assignment you have, whether you're a student, whether you're an intern, whether you're a coordinator, whether you're a middle manager, whether you're the VP trying to get to the CEO role, every time you look at that next mountaintop, you have to remember that the reason you're going to get there is based on you actually fulfilling and being the best expression of what you're in now. And that for me, that's always been true. And I think that's what actually gave me opportunities. So to your question of how did they get noticed? It was both somebody noticing it in me, but me also, I feel like, preparing and doing my job well. And, the idea that I was showing up and actually living with the sense that I was already in the role I was in, that I wanted to be in, but yet I still had the title or the influence of the role that I was currently in. And, the sports analogy to that is practice like the starter. You show up and you're the sophomore on the high school football team, but you're the number 2 or the number 3 quarterback. And there's an all-stater who's a senior, who's starting. So what do you do during practice? Well, you practice like you're the starter. You practice like the all-stater and start dressing and speaking and showing up and acting and communicating and preparing like you're in that role way before you're already in it. And that's the kind of leader that's going to get noticed, is the leader who is not looking around just with wide-eyed intention towards the dream, but actually that sense that, no, you're taking care of the place you're in right now. And it's way harder to do that than it is to talk about it, because all of us have ambition. We all look at it and go, man, I can't wait till I get to that thing. But the way you get there quickest, I think, is really crush it in the now.
Yeah. And so you had this opportunity to jump into a position you didn't feel ready for with Catalyst, and then you led that organization for 12 years. I'm just curious, if you could go back and sit down with the Brad that just got the opportunity to lead Catalyst, what would you tell him about the journey that you had with Catalyst and what you learned?
Well, the first thing I would say is remember that the people closest to you need the best from you, or want the best version of you. And when I started, I was incredibly focused on the people closest to me, and they were getting the best of me. And that meant, that I was empowering. I was a healthy leader. I stopped to celebrate a lot. There was a lot of energy. If you were around me, and we had a small team, and our team, we carried a lot of energy with us. And we would celebrate everything, because at that point, it was worth celebrating. But over time, the pressure and the intensity of the role started to chip away from me at some of the things that I started with, that I started to look at and go, well, that's not important anymore. We only need to celebrate when we hit a really big mile marker. and the people closest to me started to get the leftover. And I started to focus more on actually trying to make people outside of the inner circle impress with me, or spending more energy on people furthest away. And that would be something I would say is just make sure you stay in tune with the idea that, you have to take care of your people. And that doesn't have, I didn't sit around and go at any point think, well, I'm going to drop that rule. It just slowly over time, the pressure started to get more intense, and it forced me to make some decisions and start to become dysfunctional.
Wow.
So I would remind myself of that. I would also remind myself that, and you've probably heard many people say this, but the ability for us to do something significant in the long term is way more possible than for us to really do something incredible in the short term. So a long view of faithfulness to moving the needle is actually going to have more impact over time compared to us, trying to accomplish everything in the first 3 years.
Yeah.
And that's not something you want to hear, because you want to get to it and you want to make big waves early on. But I would just remind myself, hey, you know what? This is a 20-year run, potentially 25-year run. So be intentional, be faithful, but be a good steward, but also see that there's going to be possibilities to really move the needle over the course of many years, compared to you feeling like you've got to do everything in the first 3 years. So those would be two things.
Yeah, I'm just curious. You said you got to a point where you were dysfunctional. Do you have systems in your life for people to give you feedback to kind of correct that correct your course in life? I'm just curious, what systems do you have in place to get feedback that you need to hear, may not want to hear?
Yeah. I mean, I try to be a leader who is very open to people providing feedback. And a lot of that is style. So, here's a quick story. This was something that was really, I think, indicative of the celebration culture that I had started to lose sight of. And, we hit a big milestone at one point, and we took the team out to Dave & Buster's, and we, playing skee ball and hoop shoot and all the stuff you do at Dave & Buster's. And we had enough, the team, we had enough tickets to buy something in the store. And so the team decides they're going to go buy me something in the store. And they come back with this, this bag, and inside the bag are 2 dolls. And I pull out the first doll, and they're like, hey, we got this for you. Thanks for letting us celebrate today. And there's 20 people or so that are on the team at this point. And the first doll was an angel doll. And they said, that's you. I'm like, what do you mean? Well, that's Brad. We love Brad. We love working for Brad. He's an angel. He's great leader. He empowers us. We love being around him. And then I look inside the bag, and there's a devil doll. And well, first of all, why does Dave & Buster's have angel and devil dolls in the store? But the devil doll, I pulled that out, and I'm like, well, what is this? And they said, that's Darb. I'm like, well, who's Darb? They said, that's your nickname. It's Brad backwards.
Oh, man.
And we've been calling you that for a year.
Wow.
Because there are these moments when you are not the leader we want to be around, and you're the leader that we despise and we can't stand, and you don't empower us, and you're short with us, and you have a temper, and we just want to stay away from you. And it was sort of a ha-ha moment, but it was also them as a team saying, we love you. We'll follow you, Brad, to the mountaintop. But we just want you to know that there are parts of you, again, when pressure starts to mount as a leader, you start when pressure pushes down, the things in you get pushed out. And I had started to let Darb, this devil, this sort of anti-leader, the person that I looked at and thought, I don't want to work for that person. But that started to become more of my go-to. And what the team was saying in regards to holding me accountable and being a leader who was willing to hear feedback was just, we want more Brad and less Darb. And it was a wake up call for me, So after that Dave and Buster's moment, we would put like Brad and Darb, the dolls, on a little table outside of my office. And hopefully every day, somebody would come in and they would say, "Oh, wait, Brad's here." And then the Brad doll would be there. And if Darb was in the office, then they would like put Darb up, and
that's beautiful.
Everybody would say, "Stay away, don't go in." But just stuff like, I think the key for leaders, is that you never get to the point where you don't let people who know you well, whether it's your team, spouse, friends, you don't get to the point where they don't have the right at any time to walk in and say, "Hey, listen, you know what? Like, I need to confront you on the fact that you're killing me right now. And you're not a leader I like being around. And you're not a leader that we want to be led by." Because most of us, we have blind spots. And I knew there were some things that were dysfunctional, but I didn't know it was really impacting my team to that level. But to allow myself to say, "Okay, you know what? Like, good feedback. Thank you. This is helpful. I'm going to get better." Because none of us set out on the leadership journey and say the goal is to actually be dysfunctional. That's nobody's goal. Nobody ever says that when they start out on the journey.
So maybe we need to put a link in the show notes for Angel and Devil dolls, and just have every leader implement this in their
well, and also just think about your name backwards, and then ask that question.
Anyway.
Yeah, are people walking around with that as your nickname behind your back? Wow. And it doesn't mean that they're trying to be conniving.
Sure.
Many times, again, leaders start to create barriers naturally where they don't let people in, and they start to believe the hype, and no longer are you now accountable or authentic, vulnerable, and that's dangerous. When you get to that point where people can't give you feedback, that's a really, really dangerous place to be as a leader. And that's why people start leaving. And if you're self-serving in that way, then you need a wake-up call.
Brad, thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing that story. I know it's funny, but I also know it was probably challenging for you as well. I want to talk a little bit about just running events, running conferences. You led probably the best Christian leadership conference in the nation for 12 years, and you've been in the event space forever. I'm just curious, I'll leave it really open-ended. For those who run events, run conferences, what advice do you have on putting on first-class experiences?
Gosh, well, there's so many things to that question. The first thing is you gotta really know your target and know your audience. So aim small, miss small, in the sense of if we knew at Catalyst that our target was not just a young leader, but it was a 32-year-old, and it was a 32-year-old who probably drives some sort of hybrid car. And they probably have read Jim Collins' Good to Great. They also read Andy Stanley, and they probably listen to Tim Keller. But they love Oprah, and it's a leader who is probably married and has some young kids. We knew the kind of dress they would have on, wow. The jeans they would wear, and the hoodie they would have on, and what kind of shoes. Why? Why is that important? Because we want to know exactly who we're trying to connect with. And when an older leader, for us, when, a 50-plus-year-old would say to me, "Hey, Brad, I came to Catalyst and I have some feedback for you," I would listen, but I wasn't listening as intensely as if a 32-year-old who was really our core target audience was also giving me feedback. And what's difficult when you start doing something, especially events, is that we say, "Well, we're doing this for everybody." Any leader out there can come, and that's really our target. And you got to start really focusing in on the smallest target possible. So that's a big one.
How did you? I'm just curious. How did you start to narrow that? Was it just constantly getting feedback and surveying people, taking pictures of everyone who came to the conference? What did you do?
We started with that. We started saying, and ultimately what we were saying in the beginning was, we as the people, the leaders who were building it, we were actually the customer. And that's not always true for every conference or every event or every product for that matter, that you're actually the greatest customer of the product you're creating. But for us, it was because there was a bunch of us who were in our late 20s, early 30s working for John Maxwell. And we were doing events for John. And those events were really drawing John's peers at the time. This was early 2000s who were, in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. And we said, John, we would like to actually create something for us, for our generation. And he said, great, let's do it. So we were the customer. We knew that from the beginning. And everything, ultimately, we were able to answer all those questions because we would just look at ourselves and say, well, what do we want? And if we like this, then we know that our target's going to like it. So it was a little bit easier for us to be able to craft that. And then once we started actually producing events and pushing things out into the public square, then we looked around and said, our peers showing up, and then let's actually get feedback from them of what they're going to actually want to have created for themselves. And so it was way easier for us though to do that, Doug, because we started with the mindset of let's create something that we want to attend.
Yeah. So other advice, sorry, I interrupted there. Do you have any other thoughts on just first class experiences? So know your audience.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing with events anymore is you're not going to wow people probably with light shows and lasers and smoke. I mean, sometimes you will, but we've all seen that. 20 years ago when we started, we were creating some stuff that people thought, oh, that's cool. Haven't seen that before. But in terms of production, it's going to be really hard for you to outdo the competition or to wow people. So in some ways now, it's more about actually creating community than it is about the content, because content's now a commodity. Like if I go to a conference, any conference, I've probably heard people who are speaking, or I can actually hear them for free on any outlet, whether it's a podcast or it's a sermon or, it's a commodity now. So content's not going to be the thing that differentiates you, although it still does draw people. But community is what is, I think, most important these days. Connection points, the conversations you're actually creating. And the question people need to be asking is, what can I provide people in a conference environment that is unique and different than they can get anywhere else? If I'm watching online, that's going to be similar to a lot of conferences that are out there. So how do you make your conference experience in person analog where it actually stands out nowadays? And you got to be really intentional about that. So we had to figure those pieces out. And a lot of it was that we built, everything for us was built around the team that was attending, and that we would try to create as much experiences for the team, because that became community for them. So it wasn't this idea that we were trying to connect everybody who was there at the event, thousands of leaders. It was more saying, let's build it around that team environment. But community, connection, conversation are the C's now that are way more important than what used to be only content. And that's a big differentiator these days is creating that. Let me give you one more if I can.
Yeah.
That's I think is important. I would go niche as much as you can. So it's both knowing your target, but it's also niche in regards to what are you practically providing them. And everything is moving smaller. If you're in the conference space or you're in the event space, things are moving smaller, not because people don't want to attend large events anymore, but what they do want to attend is something that's practical and that is more tribal in nature. So it's all about niche. It's all about primarily more these days, hundreds of people compared to thousands of people, and also hundreds of people gathering around a certain conversation that is specific to them. So the old days of just putting on a generic big leadership conference with thousands of people, that doesn't draw as much as it used to. But now what draws is smaller, curated, focused on a topic or two that is really specific to those leaders. And then that also provides some sense of tribe, community, connection point, that I'm now going on the journey with these people going forward. And so it's leaning definitely towards the curated, personable, compared to the large anthem arena experience. And that's a big shift right now. It doesn't mean that big events are going away, but what it does mean is that the average leader is looking around saying, I'll spend more money to go to something that's curated and smaller than I will spend money to go something that's larger and more generic.
So you talked about drawing people. Can you talk about getting butts in seats? You were responsible for filling stadiums, obviously. You knew your niche audience. Did all of a sudden you put together what you wanted and 30,000, 32-year-olds showed up? How hard do you have to work at sales to get butts in seats, and what advice do you have for filling seats?
Well, it's huge. I mean, that's, if somebody said, what were we best in the world at Catalyst? I would have said there was 3 areas. We were great at creating a story that people wanted to pay attention to and be part of. We were great at putting cheeks in seats, which is the sales part. And actually 4 things. We were great. The third thing would be we were great at actually creating an environment and an experience during the event. And then we were great at retaining people. So those were the 4. And those were really the 4 keys of a conference: is telling a story, selling the story, and actually creating revenue, whether it's sponsorships or tickets, getting people there, and then the production experience, and then retaining people and making them part of your community. But to the cheeks and seats thing, our model was very much a concierge model. And the idea was that we wanted to make Catalyst really small. And we wanted to try to connect to people personally, where, if there's 30,000 leaders attending a Catalyst event in a certain year, that all 30,000 of those we couldn't get to know, but we could get to know 3,000 of them, and we could actually be on a first name basis with 3,000 leaders who are then bringing the 30,000. So the group leader model was our secret sauce, and that's not only ours. I mean, there's lots of conferences that use that. But the group leader model turned into a concierge experience, meaning that we wanted those people, when they thought Catalyst, they thought, I know Catalyst. I know Chad Johnson. Chad Johnson's my concierge, and he takes care of us. And we buy our tickets every year from Chad. And when I'm at the event, Chad says hi and shows me to the group leader suite, and we get perks, and that story was the story we were trying to tell. And there were always going to be people who would buy a ticket just because they were going to come and there was no connection. But as much as we could take something big and make it smaller and personal and connect it to a group and a concierge experience, that was where we were trying to move people. So our funnel, the sales funnel, was very much move people into a place as much as possible where we now can have a personal connection to them. And that takes a lot more effort. There's a lot of conferences that don't do that. They just rely on the brand selling the conference, and they'll have thousands of people that'll register, and they're not trying to actually connect to them personally. But we did. We just felt like it was important to us. And, the lesson is when you're big, we all know this is true, but when you're big, you have to act small. Meaning that when you're big, you don't, people want to know that you're human. They actually want to connect to the CEO way more than just to connect to this generic 800 number. When you're small, you tend to act big. There's a commercial. I don't know what brand it is, but the guy's like in his garage, and the phone rings, and he answers, and somebody says, "Hey, can you connect me to your marketing department?" He's like, "Yeah, hold on," and then he just puts the phone down, and then he picks it back up. But that idea, when you're small, you want to act big, but when you're big, you have to really, really focus on acting small. And that's really important today, because every single one of us, we believe today that we can be accessible or connected to anybody, right? Like, I can reach out to anyone on Twitter. I feel like every brand out there that I want to be personally connected to the CEO. Now, is that true? No, but it's the perception I have, so again, we tried to make sure that anytime possible that we were human, we were connected, we were approachable, we were accessible. We weren't hiding behind 4 layers of phone numbers or emails or assistants, so that was a big deal for us. And I think it actually, it made our brand really special, but it also helped us to sell tickets because people would say, "Oh yeah, Callus, I know those guys. You should go to this event. I know them." And they really didn't know us, but they felt like they did.
Any other thoughts on events before we move on to your book?
Well, I mean, the event space is it's like I said, it's definitely moving to smaller. It's definitely moving towards more personalized experiences. If you look at even the Disney world, which is not events, but it's still in the business of creating an experience. What are they doing more today than ever? And this would be true with cruise ships or anything like that. They're actually personalizing your experience. They're making your experience more personal for you, and that's where the event world is going. So the average person will pay more for a personal curated experience compared to showing up and just sort of eating off of the main menu. They want the back room with the chef with their 4 friends, and the chef is actually like teaching them how to cook while they're eating the meal. And that's the experience. That's where we've moved towards. There's a great book called The Experience Economy, which came out 20 years ago by Pine and Gilmore, and they were sort of prophets, in that way. But that's what people want.
Along those lines, I am curious, do you have any thoughts on pricing? How do you get to pricing? And just in general, did you have a rule of thumb of you want sponsorships to cover your whole budget? And then I'm just curious when it comes to the math, how do you come to pricing and how did you pitch sponsors, et cetera?
Well, the pricing was more based on the audience, so we started our pricing model more based on if we really want a 32-year-old to attend, what can a 32-year-old afford? And that we had to force ourselves to actually price our events at a cheaper cost than the average comparable leadership event, because the average 32-year-old didn't have the budget necessarily to, pay double the amount that was probably more in line with other conferences. So it's all based on who your target is. If you're going after CEOs as your target, then you can price things considerably higher. Sponsorships for us were a big part of our revenue model. I mean, probably 20% of our revenue was coming from sponsorships. A lot of conferences is actually way more than that. But we also wanted to make sure that those were sponsors that made sense.
Sure.
Because some people will take anybody. And I would say this, when it comes to sponsorships, everybody just wants to believe, or the key with that is make sure it's authentic. Now people can see right through it, but at the end of the day, like, you got to live with the fact that you're willing to let that brand be connected to your brand. And especially once you get bigger, and, we were a big fish in a small pond as Catalyst was growing and continued to grow. So a lot of brands just wanted to be connected to us. But we had to start making decisions and saying, not sure that's the right fit. Even though they can write a big check with lots of zeros, we wanted to maintain that sense that our brand was way more important than just selling out to. And we had a year, Doug, like 2004, where we sold our soul in many ways to a sponsor. And we had several speakers that were speaking that year based on a big sponsorship that a organization paid a lot of money for. And we all looked around and thought this was a big mistake. Wow. And our audience knew it immediately. And our audience, they can sniff that out in a second. And other speakers were sniffing it out. And it was a big deal we got a lot of pushback. And so the next year we said, no more. That'll never happen again. Nobody can buy our stage ever again. And, that we had but it was hard sometimes to make that decision when a lot of money was at stake. But, we just said it's not worth it.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I want to transition. Thank you for everything on the events. I want to transition into your book, H3 Leadership, which I love. And it's Humble, Hungry, and Hustle. And I'm just curious, you've written a few books, but why this book? Why did you write it? And what can people get out of it?
Well, it was a recalibration for me. The Darb story that I told earlier, it was kind of all during that same time when I felt like my leadership, I didn't have a burnout, I didn't have a breakdown, but I was starting to get where things were moving towards dysfunction, and I wasn't leading well, even though things were up and to the right. All the measurable things in terms of the organization, and what if people were on the outside looked at everything, they would have said, "Oh, Brad, you're crushing it. Like you guys are, you're more successful than you've ever been." But yet, for me, my leadership was becoming stale, and so H3 was a recalibration to say, for the next 25 years of my career journey, I want to reestablish some habits and put those habits back in place that really revolve around humble, hungry, hustle. And that's always been my mantra, for my entire leadership journey. H3 was really something that it started in my early 20s to live those three things out, to be humble, stay hungry, and always hustle. And so that's the three-legged stool that I've always tried to stand on. And it just made sense if I was going to recalibrate that I wanted to pass that on to other people. And so far, the feedback has been that those 3 H's are really helpful. One, because they're easy to remember, but it also starts to give a lens and language to people as it relates to what are they focused on. And there's 20 habits in the book, that all fit under those 3 big buckets that I think that's the practical side of what leadership looks like.
And I know on the practical side with the book, part of your goal is to get leaders to the finish line, right? You talked about playing the long game. I'm just curious, what are maybe 1 or 2 of the habits mentioned in the book that you think are vital for leaders to get it to their finish line? Because I feel like so many leaders now burn out, fizzle, and never even come close to there.
Yeah. Well, the humble part, I would say, is the foundation. And that gets into both self-awareness and also authenticity and just that sense of knowing yourself. But it also really comes back to a sense of calling and assignment. And for me, that was a big aha moment. And I think this is helpful for leaders at any stage, is if you don't figure out the 3 big parts of purpose for your life. And I would say there's 3 parts of that. It's identity, which is who you are. It's calling, which is why you're here. And then assignment is what you do. So again, identity is who you are. Calling is why you're here. And assignment is what you do. And those 3 categories, I think, are really helpful for people to figure out the long game. And what happened for me, the danger part of Catalyst, which was amazing, but it was still dangerous, was that Catalyst was becoming my identity. So I was Catalyst Brad. I love Catalyst Brad. He was awesome. He got invited to cool things and got to go to the White House. And every time that I got to show up in circles I didn't belong in. But that was an assignment. It wasn't my identity, but it started to incorrectly become my identity. And it actually started to incorrectly become my calling. But the Catalyst season for me, that role, that job of leading Catalyst was an assignment. It was what I do. My calling is actually to influence the influencers. That's the statement on my life. And that gives me lots of runway to do lots of different things. But my identity is unchanging. So many of us, though.
Just to butt in, did you learn that while you were a Catalyst, or did it take leaving there for you to learn that on the identity?
Both. I mean, I reflecting on actually leaving and the process of leaving gave me words, and it gave me like some hooks to actually figure out like what was going to be helpful for other leaders. But me walking through it was if I wouldn't have walked through the process of stepping away from it, then I probably wouldn't have been able to articulate it as well as I can now. But this is a huge issue for all of us because, again, take an athlete, take a professional athlete for that matter. They're 34. They've been playing the game of football their entire life, right? And all of a sudden they retire when they're 35. Their identity, their calling, and their assignment have all been wrapped around the game of football. So now what? Are they just JV the rest of their life? Are they, they coasting into eternity? Are they done the rest of their life? They're just on a cruise ship playing shuffleboard? No, but that's true for all of us in these different seasons. So we've got to make sure that we're seeing primarily our job is an assignment. And here's what's interesting for the next generation, the average 25-year-old, they're going to have 15 to 20 different assignments. Wow. Because the free agent mindset and mentality and, the gig economy is upon us. Is that a bad thing? I don't think so. But it means that we've all got to figure out that sense of calling, the why am I here? That will then give me it will give me a river bank to actually swim in or take the boat down. And that way then my assignments hopefully will connect to this greater sense of calling on my life that then reflects my identity. But those all have to be working together. Otherwise we're living these just disjointed, dysfunctional lives of desperation. And we're still always trying to figure out is this the right thing? Is this the correct thing? Is this the sweet spot? And, Ken Coleman, who you've had on your show, Ken, the sweet spot is also such a similar type of conversation as this whole concept of identity, calling, and assignment. And that's what we're all moving towards, is that place where our passions line up with our gifts. And if we find that, man, that's where we want to be.
So if someone's listening to this, you also have a consulting company where you can add value to organizations and leaders. How can people, if they listen to this and they're like, wow, I'd love to connect with Brad and what he's doing, in addition to buying the book, how can they connect with you and utilize the services that you offer?
Yeah, I'm easy to get a hold of because I live out the idea of accessibility, hopefully. So my email is just, first and last name @Gmail. That's the easiest way to get me. My website is just firstandlastname.com, Brad Lomenick. And then all the social media outlets are all first and last name. I have an easy name I was able to squat on that name really early. So
that's awesome. As we conclude the first part of the interview, anything else you want to leave leaders with before we jump into the lightning round?
No, man, I if you're listening to this, kudos, because that means that you're hungry and that means you're actually learning. And the premise that a leader today has more outlets for getting better than ever before is just such an exciting time we live in. And, so good for you that you're actually stepping in, you're leaning in, you're learning. Hopefully you got your moleskin out, not just because I'm saying anything that's helpful, but just because that's the posture of a leader, is somebody who's, they're ready to soak it up. So just keep doing that.
Great. Well, thanks, Brad. And with that, let's just dive right into the lightning round. Just a bunch of fun questions that I like to ask leaders. So the first one is just, what is one belief or behavior that's changed your life?
Well, I would say my personal faith, following God has changed my life, and it gives me a purpose beyond myself. It gives me a reason to exist that's way bigger than just me. And, humility is easier, way easier when there's a story that's bigger than you. So that's probably the thing for me that shaped who I am more than anything else is my walk with God. So that would be my first answer.
Love it. If you could put a quote on a billboard for everyone to read, what would it say?
I think I'm going to go with not H3, but be humble, stay hungry, always hustle.
Love it. What's the best purchase you've made in the last year for $100 or less?
I don't know if they're $100 or less, but the Bose running earphones,
okay,
wireless, are those $100 or less? They're close to that.
I'll put them up there. I don't know. No one sticks the $100 budget when I ask this question.
So. Those are a game changer, man. If you don't have the wireless in-ear running headphones, you need to get you a pair.
Literally, though, pretty much every leader's answer has been some type of earphone, whether it's the AirPods or running air. It's so
I know.
funny. They are
Yeah.
a game
Well,
changer.
I also have those that are the noise canceling, that are the smaller ones that go in your ear, and those are also game changers. I know they're more than $100, but those are also, if you travel you should have a pair of those. And I have the both over the ear, but then I also have the in the ear. And the in the ear are way easier to manage.
Yeah. What are the top 2 or 3 books you're giving away right now outside of your own?
Bob Goff's book, both the original one, Love Does, but also Everybody Always is his most recent book. That's one I'm handing out on a continual basis. I also go back to Dave Ramsey's book constantly, EntreLeadership. I think it's one of the best books of, if you're an entrepreneur or you're starting your own business or you're just trying to figure out like how to build something. It's Dave, looking back on him building his organization. So those 2 would probably be the ones that I give out the most.
What podcasts do you listen to most often?
Oh man, L3 Leadership. Come on. What else is out there?
That's the only, yeah. All right, next. Any other ones?
Yes, I'm a podcast junkie. So, Andy Stanley Leadership Podcast, EntreLeadership, Masters of Scale, Tim Ferriss.
Good.
My most recent one, Adam Grant, his Work Life is such a good podcast. That's a newer one. I could keep going.
I love it. I was going to ask this earlier. So you've got to spend time with some of the greatest leaders on the planet, John Maxwell, et cetera. Do you have a top 3 favorite leader? What would be the top 3 leaders you've spent time with and or got to interview?
Man, good question. That's a really good question. I'm gonna probably say Jim Collins would definitely be one of those, just because he was a hero, still is, and we had him speak several times. Simon Sinek, I really like what Simon is doing. Simon's not a hero because he's more of a peer, but I just love the way he is, in some ways, reshaping the leadership conversation, especially for millennials. And then, we gave the Catalyst Lifetime Achievement Award to a bunch of people over the years at Catalyst events. And there were so many of those leaders that I just admired and, respected in massive, massive ways. That if I had to pick one of those, that would be really hard for me to, to choose one over the other. So I'll just leave it at that.
Sure. So to follow up on that, with all those leaders you've gotten to spend time with, are there 1 or 2 qualities you see over and over and over again that separates them from the other leaders? When I think of the level 5 leaders in Good to Greater, John Maxwell, what separates the good from the great when it comes to leaders?
I would say the thing I noticed the most is that they notice people. They're the top of the food chain, and they walk in and have all right and reason to have an entourage and to be the man or the woman, and for everybody to sort of serve them. But the great leaders that I admire, when they walk in the room, they automatically turn into a student. And it doesn't matter who it is. And they also treat everybody with a great sense of respect, and they pull the best out of people. And I saw this with so many leaders over the years who would come into an arena to speak at a Catalyst event or another John Maxwell event for that matter. And the great leaders would stop and say hi to the show pro people. What the show pro people, those are the people in the yellow jackets that nobody pays attention to.
Yeah.
Everybody just sees them as this distraction, or they don't even see them. And these people would stop and say, hi, hey, what's your name? Well, I'm Bill. Bill, how long you been working at this arena? 13 years. 13 years, Bill. Man, I bet you've seen a lot of people come through these doors. And they really were interested. And I think that idea that I'm constantly interested compared to that I'm trying to be interesting. And then you had the climbers. That's what John Maxwell always called them. The climbers would come in, and they're the people who think they deserve all the accolades. And they're not even paying attention to anybody. Their whole goal is just like, how much can the focus be on me? And those are the people that were annoying. I don't care how much of a platform you have. if you're walking in and you're thinking that you're all that, especially for us at Catalyst, like you immediately got put on the blacklist. And you might have been invited one time, but that was it. We wanted to work with people and actually have people represent us and speak for us that we liked working with. So I guess my advice to people is, when you get to the top of the food chain, don't start acting like you deserve to be there.
What are one or two items still left on your bucket list?
Oh gosh. Well, I want to go to all 4 major golf events, the majors. I want to go to all 7 continents. I want to ride an Air Force One. I want to skydive. I want to learn how to speak a foreign language.
Pretty good.
Yeah. I actually want to write 4 books. So I'm 2 in and I'm working on the 3rd. So I'm halfway there.
Can you give us a 30-second trailer?
Well, yeah, I would. No, I would love to. It's still so like not formed.
Sure.
Something around this whole idea of the power of who, and especially for younger leaders, I think, that the premise of working on your who early in your life is such a big part of your leadership journey, but also then talking about, well, what does it mean to build platforms as a leader that other people stand on? And that's been my story that I've tried to live out. Is the greatest thing for me when it comes to influence is that anything that I get to be a part of, my job is to immediately put other people on the stage or the platform that I'm building and give them the opportunity to be leveraged because of something that I've gotten to be part of. So the power of that is so important in leadership. And, it's one thing to build your own platform, which I'm not saying it's not something that you should work on, but then the next level is to say, how do I build something that then can be used for other people? And I mean, that's what you're doing, Doug. Like you're interviewing people and giving them the opportunity based on the platform that you've built with L3 to then stand on your shoulders, and share their message. And I just think that's the ultimate example and form of leadership, is to allow people to stand on your shoulders. And that's what I want to be. I don't want to be the barrier that gets in the way of other people.
Do you have, what is one question that you ask every leader great leader you get to spend time with?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the question that always spurs up the most interesting conversation is, what have you failed at? Or what are some of the things that you don't do well, or you haven't done well, or, what lessons have you learned from the places where you failed? And I think a lot of the great leaders really appreciate that. I also really like asking people, what are they learning right now? Because that gives them the chance to sort of cut all the things that are top of mind into the conversation. And, the great leaders they're spinning on something. There's always an idea in there. So those are the 2 questions I'd probably ask everybody.
So we'll close with that question. If you haven't answered it already, what are you learning right now in your life?
Well, a couple things. One is that at this stage of life, I'm a translator. And I mean that I'm actually setting between 2 generations, and that a lot of what I get to do is I get to translate between the young and the older, and it works both ways. And my job in that situation is not to be the hero. It's simply to be a connector and a conduit for conversation to take place. And to that point, the other thing I'm learning, both that I'm trying to do, but I'm also watching other people, is that I think the great opportunity today for leadership and influence is the curation model. So you don't have to be the expert. You just have to be the one that's gathering the experts, or you're curating the expertise. And, that's true in newsletters. It's true in events. It's true in thought leadership. But that premise that I'm the aggregator, I'm the conductor, I'm the curator, compared to I'm the expert, or I'm the hero, or it's all about my content. And those are the people that just seem to have the most influence going forward. And that's what I'm trying to figure out and think through, and how to best be a curator. And, I'm spending a lot of energy trying to dig into that one.
Well, Brad, this was fun. Thank you so much for your time today. It was extremely valuable to me, and I know it'll add value to all of our listeners. So thank you.
Yeah, man. Loved it. Thanks, Doug.
Hey, everyone, and thank you so much for listening to our interview with Brad. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. You can find ways to connect with him and links to everything that we discussed in the show notes at l3leadership.org/episode 213. While you're on our website, I also encourage you to sign up for our email list. That's the best way to stay up to date with everything we're doing here at L3 Leadership. And when you sign up for our email list, you actually get a free copy of my ebook, Making the Most of Mentoring, which is my step-by-step process for getting and cultivating mentoring relationships with leaders. I think it'll add a ton of value to your life. It's extremely practical, so I encourage you to go and sign up for that. I want to thank our sponsor, Henny Jewelers. They're a jeweler owned by my friend and mentor, John Henny. My wife, Laura, and I got our engagement and wedding rings through Henny Jewelers, and we just think they're an incredible organization. Not only do they have great jewelry, but they also invest in people. In fact, they give every engaged couple a book to help them prepare for marriage, and we absolutely love that. And so if you're in need of a good jeweler, check out hennyjewelers.com. As always, I like to end with a quote, and I quote Bob Goff often, and he wrote this recently, and I just thought it was awesome. He said this, he said, "Don't worry about all the steps. Begin." Someone needs to hear that today. Don't worry about all the steps. Begin. Thanks for listening and being a part of L3 Leadership. Laura and I appreciate you so much, and we will talk to you next episode.